This passage is from the 2nd chapter, the 20th stanza. This self is never born, nor does it perish. Once existing, I should say from the Bhagavad Gita. This self is never born, nor does it perish. Once existing, it cannot ever cease to be. It is birthless, eternal, changeless, ever itself. It is not slain when the body is killed. This stanza emphasizes the fact that the soul remains unharmed even though the body in which it dwells decays. The spirit Krishna is telling the soul, Arjuna, who is afraid to destroy the perishable senses and to establish the imperishable consciousness of God, that he should find the imperishable soul and its everlasting happiness by relinquishing the perishable dualities of pleasure and pain commingled with the physical body. Chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita begins with Arjuna's deep distress at the thought of having to make war on his own kinsmen. Most of the succeeding stanzas quote Krishna's timeless words of consolation, wisdom, and encouragement. Thus, it sometimes happens that the devotee, disappointed with his spiritual progress so far, grows discouraged. He may think, I gave up tangible pleasures for intangible joys. Now I am left with nothing. Essentially, this despondency is rooted in a longing for spiritual freedom. Arjuna did not say, goodbye, God and all your crazy crowd, like a hoary but undevotional ascetic in a delightful story by Yoganandaji. He did not look back with longing on the false delights of the world. He was discouraged, rather, because his hopes of spiritual experience had not yet been fulfilled. Torn between two worlds, but believing in the upward path, he sat back in his chariot and cried, I can do no more. Krishna, who represents the divine presence within the soul, in other words, comforts the devotee inwardly and thrills him with loving reassurance. Spiritual growth is rarely sudden, unless an individual is already blessed from birth with exceptionally good karma. The Lord does not necessarily speak with human lips through vision, though he manifests himself in physical form through the human guru. Even the guru, however, teaches primarily through the disciple's own intuitive perceptions. Even Arjuna's tears of despondency are spiritually wholesome, for they also express an unfulfilled longing for divine truth and rivet the mind on higher aspiration. His unquenched longing for the indescribable joy of divine communion. From thinking rationally, the devotee passes to complete surrender to the unreasoning but clear-sighted perceptions of intuition. This is a necessary attitude for further spiritual advancement. It must be understood that even such encouragement from silent intuition is a sign of much spiritual work in former incarnations. It may seem cruel on God's part not to respond instantly to human doubts, fears, and hesitations, but think how many lives the ego has wandered away from God, spurning every hint of his love and resolved instead to seek fulfillment once again in the world of the senses. Arjuna no longer feels attracted to the world. Rather, he has reached that stage where the world no longer appeals to him, but he hesitates to spurn it altogether. That God at this stage would offer strong hope and consolation of insights and intuitions to be attained in time is already an indication of considerable inner progress. Does Arjuna's pity for his enemy kinfolk indicate that he desires again the pleasures he has renounced? Because the Gita is written as a guide for everyone who seeks God, it must be allowed that this nostalgia might be Arjuna's problem too, though the text doesn't indicate that it necessarily is. His despondency could be due only to his lack so far of spiritual fulfillment. In any case, the Lord says to him, "They are your foes. Don't be soft on them, for their true intent is to destroy you. Pity for past pleasures can bridge once again the gap one has created between himself and them. It is a great mistake on the spiritual path to toy even idly with thoughts of what has been left behind. Renunciation of the world in thought as well as in deed is essential. Watch the heart for any ripple of attraction there. You may feel safe from worldly desires, but if in your heart you find the least tremor of excitement on hearing about the pleasures of the senses or on listening to stories about them, shun them like the infection they really are. People may scoff, saying, "It's just in the mind." Exactly so. The mind itself is the battlefield. There is no other. Sense delights seem pleasurable only by an act of imagination. The true self can be sustained only by spiritual states of consciousness, such as divine love, calmness, and bliss. The bliss of the soul, experienced especially in deep meditation, is self-born. That is why the sage Patanjali writes of enlightenment as a process of smriti, or memory. The instant that soul bliss or love is felt, it is recognized. It doesn't have to be learned, and the taste for it doesn't need to be acquired. Again, when the cosmic sound Om is truly heard, one knows with intuitive certainty that he could hear it through eternity and never grow tired of it. The most beautiful music, by contrast, grows tiresome, even irritating after a time. Stanza 10 states that Krishna, before exhorting Arjuna to do battle, spoke as if smiling. This phrase, Yoganandaji said, is important because it indicates that God is no stern judge of human behavior, but he is on our side. He wants us to advance spiritually and forever forgives us if we err. The words, as if smiling, indicate that Arjuna had already advanced far on the path to win such an indication of God's love. As Arjuna remains inactive during the war and participates only as Krishna remains inactive during the war and participates only to guide Arjuna's chariot, so he often seems remote to the devotee and even indifferent to the most earnest efforts to attain him. Krishna's smile, however, is ever there for those who seek him earnestly. It is not easily won, but loving reassurance is given from time to time in one form or another. The devotee feels God's loving support in his heart. In time, he is conscious of that inward smile. It is with this smile that Krishna gives his discourse in the Bhagavad Gita. It is with sweetest love that God exhorts the devotee to seek him unconditionally as the only source of fulfillment there is. An important point in the consolation Krishna gives to Arjuna is that his is not a teaching to be heartless. Human love is a part of divine love. It only becomes a mistake when it fixes an attachment on one or on a few particular forms. Our loved ones must be separated from us in death, whether by their death or by our own. Therefore, we should always, with discrimination, keep in mind that all human beings and everything in existence comes from the same one God, who alone should receive our first love. Thus, through the Bhagavad Gita, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om. Well, I have to say, I just love Krishna's consolation part of the Gita. One of my favorites, although it's, no matter what we say about the Gita, all parts are the favorite. But this one for today is my favorite. And what I really love is Krishna is saying, Arjuna, I see you have issues, I see you have problems, but let me just give you words that will ease your inner pain right now. And so he reminds Arjuna, how we are just souls, how we're just in this body, but we'll be in many more, or we've been in many more, and we're just going towards freedom in God. Just giving us reminders. Don't forget this, don't forget that. I know you feel bad, but don't forget that. Don't forget this. We're souls. And it's just such a loving, beautiful thing that the Guru says to the devotee. And it reminds us that we are never truly alone. I'd like that to be the main point of today. To try and tune in to that, we are never truly alone. We're in this, as a spiritual community, we're in this all together. And our trials and tribulations are not unique to us. This scripture, being 5,000 years or more old, was the same meaning then as it is for now. 5,000 years ago. That is a long time to us in mortal bodies. For that to be just as true then as it is true now, no matter where our consciousness has been through all these years, and many of us were probably there at the time, watching Master as Arjuna, watching Babaji as Krishna, having this multi-dimensional meaning of a conversation. What a joy that on the one hand we can get depressed, oh my God, why am I not free yet? On the other hand, we can say, what a joy. Everything is timeless anyway. And so who cares if I was there 5,000 years ago? Master said we have millions of lives before we're free, so that takes at least 1 million years, right? Times 100 or something. Who knows? But we're never alone in our fight. Sometimes it feels like we're very alone when we're coming against ourselves on the spiritual path, when we're trying to break through barriers, when we're feeling stuck and wanting to move forward. Sometimes there's astrological transits that go through our charts that can make us feel extra alone. I remember one time, many years ago, I was going through something, and I was feeling very, very alone. And we have a friend who's an astrologer, so he would just give informal comments, and he knew our charts well. So he said, the thing you're going through now might make you feel like a Coke bottle floating in the middle of the ocean. Have you ever been in very deep water and the waves are coming up and you're kind of going, That was the feeling he said. And in actuality, the beautiful thing about this too, the spiritual path is full of so many dualities. On the one hand, we're not alone. On the other hand, we are that Coke bottle floating in the middle of the ocean. On the other hand, we're not alone. And so we have all these contradictory things happening to us on the spiritual path. I specifically loved, let me just quote this thing. Was it this one or this? Okay, I'll read these two points. So, first of all, one of the things he wrote, Arjuna was discouraged, rather, because his hopes of spiritual experience had not yet been fulfilled, torn between two worlds, but believing in the upward path. Now, that belief that we all have in the upward path is based in experience. It's not just some theoretical thing like, I read that there's this thing called the spiritual path, and you're supposed to get free in God, and at some point you unite with Him, and I'm interested in climbing that ladder, please. And so that is the theoretical. Instead, whether it was in this lifetime or in past lifetimes, we've had that experience that pushes us forward, that makes us believe in the upward path because of experience, not because of, sounds good to me, let's go for it. Although that's not a bad attitude to have, but we want to make that experience more and more inward. So the other quote I wanted to read was very important. From thinking rationality, the devotee passes to complete surrender to the unreasoning but clear-sighted perceptions of intuition. This is a necessary attitude for further spiritual advancement. So from thinking rationally, so from outward thinking to inward perceiving, from outward comparison to inward confirmation. There's a thing in mathematics called an inflection point. And when you have a curve going this direction and then going this direction, there's this one point in the middle called the inflection point where the mathematics changes a bit. And in every curve that's this way, there's always this inflection point. And there's an inflection point between the inner life and the outer life. And we all must go through that. And that's why we're not alone, because we all have this challenge before us, and we all are getting through it one way or another. But that inflection point of outward to inner takes a leap of faith. We go from believing that the outer world is reality, that we have to compare ourselves to others. Even on the spiritual path, there was this young guy, well, maybe he's not that young. To me, more and more people, the older we get, the more younger people seem like young children, even though they're not really. So he came, he's married with children, so he's not a baby. But he just said, I just don't know how I can be here and pursue Kriya because, the mountain is so high for, spiritual attainment. And, I can't basically compete with all the other people that are here for that. He had a very outward way of looking at it. Now, in general, when we are outward oriented, we do think in terms of competition. We enter a situation, many people enter a situation and think, how can I win this? How can I beat the others? And then they come to the spiritual path and they think the same thing. How can I be more spiritual than everyone else? How can I appear to be spiritually advanced? How can I climb the ladder at this spiritual organization? It's only because they're taking what they know from the corporate world and overlaying it to the spiritual world. It's very important that someone who has these kinds of feelings not join spiritual organization at that point until they work through their desires for the outward accomplishment that comes with that. You need to work through those desires in the world. Otherwise, what do we see? Priests at the temple running it like a business without any spiritual vibration. Priests in the Catholic religion doing whatever they're doing. Just people who join the religion to join the organizational part of it, who still have desires to conquer and everything just don't do well. They just don't do well. They need to work through that desire to compete, to win outwardly, to have dominance over. All that kind of stuff has to be worked through before joining any kind of spiritual organization at its organizational level, I should say. Not joining the organization, but at the organizational level. So the one thing about transitioning from the outer world to the inner world, I mentioned this leap of faith, where we are used to living outwardly identified our whole life. We learn to check in with how other people feel. You know, am I doing okay? What does this person think of me? What does that person think of me? How's it going? We learn to just compare, to say I'm okay because I'm getting outward okay from everybody else. The leap of faith is, first of all, of course we care what other people think on a certain level, because we don't want to be kicking dirt in their face and, you know, doing bad deeds. On the other hand, to turn our backs on those faces of disapproval. What does Auntie think? What does Uncle think about the boring spiritual path? Why would you ever want to meditate? You know, turning our backs on that critical thing that happens in our lives takes strength and a leap of faith. When we are only outward identified and we try to climb the outer ladder, it is based on inner magnetism to a point. You see, very successful people still have magnetism, but it's very often worldly magnetism. So when we begin to meditate, we suddenly realize that there is this inner happiness to fulfill instead. And it's difficult to separate out this inner happiness I'm feeling with the happiness I feel from the unpinch that everything's okay on the outside. They're both about what we think are happiness, but they're so different. And I know this sounds obvious, but we still confuse them all the time, every day, because we can very easily get into a funk where we are mad about the way something's happening outside of us, and we think that has to do with us being happy. So again, it takes a leap of faith to trust inner happiness and separate that from the outer happiness. The outer fake happiness, I should say. The outer confirmation that, okay, you're doing okay because the whole family agrees with you, or the whole board of directors agrees with you, or whatever it is. So we slowly but surely, as we meditate, begin to trust that the most important reality is that inner happiness. And even though it doesn't mean we suddenly overturn the apple cart and tell our family, see you later, none of you believe in the truth, which a younger person might do. Instead, it's a balanced feeling. We come away from in the spiritual path with a balanced feeling the longer we're on it. At the beginning, it's good to have a fire for it, because very often it takes a lot of energy and fire to just say, no, I'm doing this. You know, I don't care what you think. We're saying that inside. I don't care what you think, but I'm doing this. So this guy who wanted to just obviously the reason why he felt like giving up was because he could only see coming here as, how do I climb the ladder? He got over it, and he's doing great. But he had to get over that outer sense of what the spiritual path is about. And let's see, I had another thing. The thing that Arjuna is facing is feeling stuck, and the chariot not being able to move with the wheel stuck in the mud. Such a perfect image of everything. He's reached this point where he's realized enough that the inner happiness is what counts more than the outer happiness of everybody around him. And of course, it's got the double, triple, quadruple meaning, but I'll just go with the couple meanings where it can be the obvious meaning of him saying, I'm going to do the spiritual path, and the people around me disapprove, but I'm going to do it anyway. The deeper meaning is, I'm going to do the spiritual path, and I have some attachments that I need to let go of that I don't really want to let go of. What are they hurting? They're not hurting anything. Just certain bad attitudes or whatever it is. God has a way of making us get stuck so that we can then say, finally, something needs to change. He has a way of turning the vice until we cry, okay, I'll make the change. But before that, he does what Arjuna does, which is, I can't go forward anymore. And so the vice is on Arjuna now. And Krishna very lovingly is trying to explain the world and all that kind of stuff, but it's still going to take Arjuna's willpower to change. Krishna doesn't say, I'll do it for you, Arjuna. He does everything else. You know, he's the presence of bliss. He's everything else. But it still takes this little human being in Arjuna. He's a great human being. But it still takes this human being to use their willpower to finally say, I'm going to trust the inner. I'm going to kill off my foes that keep me attached to the earth. It's such an interesting thing that we're seeking unity with the divine, and yet we have to completely detach from the body, from the earthly plane. So we're doing two things. We're detaching and we're attaching. We are attaching more and more to the divine every time we meditate. Every time we meditate, even whether we're not aware of it, the spiritual reality becomes more and more a part of our reality, and the physical reality becomes less and less. We may not be aware of that fully, but that's really what's happening. And so what do we do when we're stuck? Being stuck is such a gift, even though it's very unpleasant to be stuck. But that's the other way why we are not alone, because we all get stuck in the same ways. The basic way and the basic explanation of being stuck is being contractive. That contractive feeling is, you know, I don't mean this as to make fun of everyone. We all do it. Poor me, you know. I'm just not feeling great about life. I don't like that happened. You know, why did they have to say that? You know, what's happened is we've become outwardly identified. But that contraction, it's not something to make fun of, because we can go lifetimes feeling contracted. You know, I'm not included like everyone else. That's another good one. Everyone else gets favor except me. You know, these are things we hear every day from people, and we all experience it. We are not alone. We all experience these stuck states. And so, how do we get out of it? Because sometimes it manifests as deep depression, which can be very much a, medical condition even. And how do we get out of these things? We may need, someone may need a counselor to help get them out of depression. If it's something that meditation, if you're really low, you need help. Most likely medical help of some sort. Get it. It doesn't mean you're not spiritual if you go get it. Then if your depression is only this high instead of this low, then you can most likely get out of it on your own with meditation. And God sends whispers of what to do next. But depression is a tamasic state. Tamasic means there's sometimes very little we can do ourselves to address it. It has to just pass. That's tamasic. But there is always something we can do. So getting help is one way to move the energy. The other thing that we can do then is see just ignore the fact of the emotional state right now. What can I do right now that gives me a tiny bit of energy? What can I do right now that will just move me an inch? If it's, I will walk for 5 minutes. Sometimes moving the body, doing something physical, will help get us out of that mental state. But we've got to learn to expand. I wanted to read a little list of things that I wrote out about things that everybody feels on the spiritual path when they get stuck. Okay? Again, we're not alone. We all have these things. Sometimes we're frustrated with our habits and feel we're not making progress. Okay, what if that statement is true? We're frustrated with our habits and we feel we're not making progress. But what we tend to do is, I'm not making progress. It's not a true statement. It's a critical thought we have on ourselves that makes us feel stuck. See, these thoughts make us feel stuck when we're not really stuck. These thoughts make us feel like we can't move forward when in fact we really can. We get critical of ourselves and give ourselves negative messages, thus closing our hearts. This keeps us from good feelings and bliss awaiting us when our heart is open. So that's just a matter of, we beat ourselves up critically, the heart closes, and then we can't feel bliss. And we then say, I'm not moving forward spiritually because I can't feel God's presence. When we don't realize it's our silly thoughts. Master said, be very aware of the thoughts and the messages we're giving ourselves. It can often be helpful to write it down. If you're feeling stuck, write down what the messages are in your head and address them. Well, that's ridiculous. What do you mean I'm not making progress? That's ridiculous. Look, I've made progress in this way, this way, that way. Why am I squishing myself down? We get stuck in old behaviors that are hard to change. Master said, choose our battles so we feel we are making progress. Choose our battles. We have a friend who was saying, I was very frustrated with how my husband was behaving. And I kept reminding him to stop doing this one thing. Stop it. And finally, he wouldn't say anything. And finally I said, why aren't you changing? And he said, that's not the battle I'm fighting right now. And it was like, oh, we choose the battles we can win. So say you have a list of 10 bad habits. You can't get up in the morning. You forget to energize. There's a long list of embarrassing things. You snapped at someone. The anger habit is strong. Or you told yourself negative messages 10 times a day. Whatever it is you did, choose one thing to change. And change it with as much energy as you can. I may not be able to change the fact that I snap at people, but maybe I can learn to redirect all the critical energy I say to myself. Because truly, when we snap at other people and we are mean to other people, it's because we're mean to ourselves. So maybe we have to learn to stop being mean to ourselves first. So that's a battle. Of course, it's nice to learn not to be mean to others. And everybody else's preference is that you're not mean to them. But if your battle is so much that you have these thoughts coming into your head all the time, you have to find a way to fight those thoughts. Sometimes life can feel like it's imploding on us so strongly that we feel there's nothing we can do. But there's always something. Okay. We may go through times of rebellion, whereas in the beginning we felt all this wonderful enthusiasm for the path. We then lose some steam and fall away from what we used to pursue with willpower. Some of this has to do with karma, but are we living off our good karma and not creating new karma to keep us on the path? That means, can I raise my energy somehow? It is possible to kind of lose steam. And rather than get critical of ourselves because we've lost steam, it's important to just be proactive and do something helpful for ourselves. Because everybody's on the spiritual path. Everybody. Ups, downs, meditating, forgetting to meditate. Meditating, forgetting to meditate. It's just up and down, up and down. But we want to try and make the downs higher and higher. We want to try and prevent the downs from really going as down as they used to. I never get as depressed as I used to. Not that I was a depressive person, but I used to really get into this mode, this very contractive mode. So whatever it takes, find that thing that's going to make you feel expansive. I often tell people some advice I got once, which is when we're feeling really contractive, do a healing prayer. As soon as your energy turns from me, to, oh, someone else needs help, then boom, things change. Very often people will come and serve at the center during the week or during the weekends. They'll come, we've always got a list of things to do. It's a way to get out of yourself and to serve. And serving is so helpful to make us stop just worrying about our own little lives. I'll just see if there's one more I might want to mention. Well, just one thing I'll just read this. We have many bad experiences with people sometime, and we feel God is not protecting us if bad things happen. It makes us turn our back on God and feel as though we're not supported. And so often God is there with us, wanting to help us, wanting to whisper a way out of our trap. And all we have to do is listen. Don't turn our backs on God. We're back in this life because we probably in some way turned our backs on God in a few different ways for the last million lifetimes. And so try and really feel as though, try to tune into God's presence. One of the things I always get really concerned about in classes and with newer people is people not feeling the presence of the divine in their meditation, in the silent time. It's one of my little missions, I feel, is to try and help us cognize and understand that that time in silence is the real meditation time. That's what Yoganandaji said. And that's when we feel that presence of God, and that's when we get the encouragement from God that He's there for us. That Divine Mother is there for us, always there for us. And if we can just get that feeling of the presence, then we have it. Then we have the truth, and then we have that reassurance. If we can't, and that has to do with the closing of the heart, then it's just not possible to feel that presence. We can still do all the techniques and everything, but with the heart closed. So we've got to find a way to get the vice that goes in the opposite direction, that forces the heart open. Maybe force isn't the right way, but coaxes the heart to open. And that begins with self-compassion. That begins with, as Swamiji said, I love the affirmation for patience. What he says in there is that we have to really have patience in order to get that love of God. And the more we give, the more we will get back. But it's a conundrum because we're not giving to get. We're giving because it's the heart's natural love for the divine. I was talking yesterday about the 8 meannesses of the heart. Sri Yukteswarji in the Holy Science lists these 8 meannesses. The Holy Science, I highly recommend everyone to read it. There are certain parts that are a little incomprehensible, like all the koshas, and for me, I can mentally follow it, but there's 17 of this, and then there's 16 of this. When you're looking at the soul, it's kind of like, well, from my experience, I don't get it. However, when he talks about natural love of the heart, he also has a argument for why we're actually fructarians, which is an interesting thing. Okay, let's see. So they're hatred, shame, fear, grief, condemnation, race prejudice, pride of family and nationality, and smugness. So you can say, oh my gosh, I have this one, I have that one, I have this one, I have that one. But what he's saying is, when we remove these, then the heart's natural love is centered in bliss. Then the heart's natural love. So all we have to do is remove these. It's like Patanjali's yamas and niyamas, where you're just removing a behavior that allows the right behavior, which is already there, to bloom. It's not like I've got to make myself do the right thing. I've got to make myself. It's like, oh, it's already there. The right way to be comes from removing that negative trait. So anyway, I hope you all can remove the meannesses of your heart. We are always working on that too, Dharmarajan and I. And so God bless you. Remember that we are not alone. Okay.